Hello. Welcome to the SumerSports Show. Lindsay Rhodes and Thomas Dimitrov with you as we head into week 7 with some rosters that look a little bit different. Well, one for trade purposes, one for major injury purposes. We've got a lot to talk about today, Thomas.
Well, look, are we kicking it off with a Jets trade? Is that what
we might as well, right? This was the whole show just last week, and we discussed what this might look like, and we got our answers today. So Davante Adams on his way to New York following their loss last night. Mike Williams running the wrong route on the last play of the game for the Jets, and within minutes, they have a new wide receiver to take his place, Davante Adams, and we know the comp now.
Well, we know the comp, and I'm a little surprised the comp came down a little bit and that there was no money taken care of by the Raiders on all of this. I really, really thought they were going to have to step up and do something, whether it was a quarter or whether it was a half of what that compensation was going to be. It didn't happen. What's your take on that from an outside look?
Yeah, it feels like a desperation move by the Jets, right? Like I feel like clearly the hang up here, because they were obviously having conversations for the last week plus, and the comp and the money were likely a hang up. And so maybe what happened last night kind of pushed the Jets, Woody Johnson, over the edge and said, fine, like we'll pay. Like we're already so deep into this investment in this year's team and it's not working. And we only have 2 wins, and like, let's just get somebody here who can help us ASAP.
I think it's a really good move by the Jets to do what they need to do. I think Joe Douglas is in an interesting spot there right now. As I've mentioned before, Joe is a really good personnel man. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to pick talent. He knows how to bring in talent. Ultimately, you have to get sign off by an owner on something like this. That's forever the way it is. I know there's been a lot of talk. Let's just backtrack for a minute here. A lot of talk out there that Joe Douglas was not necessarily a part of that decision, nor was Aaron Rodgers, contrary to what we had started talking about on our last discussion.
The decision to let Saleh go.
So now you have Jeff Ulbrich in there. I think it's important that we bring context to this move, even with Davante Adams. How much did Jeff Ulbrich have as far as say in the discussion with Joe Douglas, the general manager, and Woody Johnson, the owner? Did they sit down as a 3-way and talk this through? Did the owner literally say, hey, you guys take care of whatever you need to do is get some damn wins on the board here? How did this all go down? And it's important to know how it went down. And how much did Aaron Rodgers knock on the door? How much did he articulate his thoughts about what needed to happen on this offense? Because they obviously have some talent on the defense. They have talent on the offense too, right? Keep building. They have to win games. This is vital for the next stages of this organization, for Jeff Ulbrich to have an opportunity to maybe be the heir apparent. You know, where Joe Douglas is going right now. Again, I think this is a really important move for this organization right now because it caps off what you were talking about. We are all in on this. This is a really, really important time while we have Aaron Rodgers still operating well. What was his passer rating very quickly? Was he in the 120s yesterday?
I will pull that up really fast. He is a guy that I think is interesting in terms of like how much of he had a 99. So
he dropped 99. Okay. I know that he was up there for a while. Sorry, Lindsay. I know in watching, I was like, you just have to capitalize on what you have there. There was a big investment in it. We all know this. This is not rocket science. I think for the organization to keep the morale going in the right way, let's put our finishing touches here and let's go now.
Yeah, he's such an interesting quarterback for a number of different reasons, obviously. But his commitment to continue throwing the ball to Allen Lazard and the fact that they have a connection. Allen Lazard was their leading receiver last night from a yardage standpoint with 114 yards. He continues to get targeted despite the fact that Garrett Wilson's on the field. Garrett Wilson has more targets, right? He had 10, had 8 catches, also got to 100. That was probably his best game of the season last night against the Bills. But the fact that he continues to go to Allen Lazard, Davante Adams has talked about this in the past, that it takes a minute to like get on the same page with Aaron Rodgers. It did for him. He was a guy who hit in his third year in the league. And I don't know how much that had to do with just it taking a minute for him to kind of figure out the whole rhythm of working with Aaron Rodgers and being where Aaron wanted him to be, all that kind of stuff. But I think that there was a conversation that happened last week. We were actually live on the air here doing our show when they were making their comments, when Woody Johnson was talking to the press in New York about the fact that he'd fired Robert Saleh. And there was a lot of conversation that came about after that press conference about people just not believing that Aaron Rodgers, that he hadn't specifically overtly asked Aaron Rodgers for his take on Robert Saleh, that Aaron Rodgers didn't weigh in on that. I think personally that it's very believable. And we talked about this to a degree last week too, that all you would do is not necessarily put him on the spot. You don't want to put him on the spot with a guy who is his head coach right now and say like, hey, should he stay? Should he go? Would you like him fired? Like, I think that there are obvious ways that we can envision a conversation happening where you're just getting a feel from Aaron Rodgers. And if there's one thing that we all know about that guy is he wears his heart on his sleeve. Like if he's frustrated, we see it on his face. We see it in the body language. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or like a psychotherapist to go figure out how Aaron Rodgers is feeling about the team and the environment around him. So I think that you could easily deduce whether or not you think, or whether you feel like he thinks you're on the right path. And my guess is that the conversation about Davante Adams has been had for a long time. And Aaron talking about the fact that he and Davante have a shorthand and he thinks that Davante will actually be will help them move the ball forward pretty dramatically. I think he must think that Davante is a pretty big piece to this puzzle. So we'll see.
So can we segue into a decision that whether it was Jeff Ulbrich and organizationally about changing the offensive coordinator, right? That's one of the things that I think is interesting, given the fact that Aaron Rodgers is as close as he is, with the pass off. Yes, of course, Nathaniel Hackett. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett, to me, I thought that he was going to run the course here, to be honest with you. It's not happening. There must be a lot going on there that way. But where does that really come into play now? Is it, hey, we're gonna bring you in the receiver that you want, but the new head coach is going to make that decision. And Jeff Ulbrich, again, we had him in Atlanta, tough ass, look you in the eye, former player in the league, right? Had some journeyman to him, did whatever he needed to get things done. And here he is now in charge. And I know for him right now, it's like, I am in charge now. I was a linebacker coach for a while. Then I was a coordinator. It's my time to take this team over and I need to make a legitimate impact. So what are we doing? Well, the first thing is let's make this change on the offensive coordinator side. Without getting into a ton of detail, how does that affect the quarterback? And is the quarterback going to himself, all right, I got it. As long as I have my receivers here and everything, I'll continue to communicate with Hackett on certain levels, but understand that there's another sheriff in town as far as the offensive coordinator. It becomes a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
I think that from an offensive standpoint, I don't you think Aaron's probably running the show in terms of like what kinds of plays? I mean, he's not calling the plays per se. He's not standing there like with the, but my guess is that he has a ton of input during the week and is influencing that.
Sure, he does. He definitely does. I guess what I'm saying is, when you are a loyal guy, and evidently those two are very well connected, Hackett and Aaron. So like, again, how far does that go? And how agitated might it be? Remember when you saw that push, when Aaron Rodgers pushed away from Saleh, like that was kind of edgy and dusty, right? When it happened, how is that connection right now with a defensive coordinator and now becomes a head coach? I wonder how that's going to be. I want to watch that closely and see the interaction between Aaron Rodgers and Jeff Ulbrich, because I think that's going to be an important relationship. Yeah. I think they both understand each other because they're both true competitors. It will just be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, and like I said, I mean, he'll tell us with his face all the time. Here's my question, and ultimately this is the only one that matters. They went and they made this move. Do you think that this is a move that makes them competitive? Do you think that they are now with Davante Adams? You think we're going to see an uptick in quality of offense to the degree that it makes them competitive and they're a contender?
I think it can help for sure. I don't think this is one of those moves that is going to be, monumentally different than what it was in my mind. I'm thinking it's going to be a confidence builder. It's going to be, more and more time that Aaron Rodgers has, behind himself, after that injury. I think the better they're going to get. He's going to have his up and down games, but he's also going to come back and play some good football like he did in my mind yesterday. Last night. I don't know if you thought that. But I mean, I started thinking about it. Just watching him move around, it just takes time coming off of an injury like that, as we know. And I don't think just a single move like this is going to change it. I think it's going to help. I think it's going to be an uptick, to your point.
Speaking of injuries, okay, this is I can't wait to get your thoughts on this. Aidan Hutchinson, the loss of that particular player for the Lions is so insanely massive. I mean, just so good for them coming off the edge. He's obviously, Dan Campbell is not ruling him out for the season, but he has a broken tibia. So realistically, he probably is not going to be back this year. He is a guy who's accounted for 55% of the Lions' pressures, Thomas. And worth noting here, the Lions lost Marcus Davenport, their number 2 pass rusher, a few weeks ago. So, you talk about next man up, but who is the next man? How much of a downgrade is he? Do they need to go make a move? This could, in the short term, assuming that they don't necessarily make a trade like in the next few hours, I think this week's game against the Vikings of all teams is going to be really interesting to watch how the loss of Aidan Hutchinson affects the defense, because are they going to have to blitz more in order to get that pressure on the quarterback? Does that impact coverage? Can they still play man at the rate that they are? I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup just to see the effect that Aidan Hutchinson not being on the field has on this team.
Well, this obviously it sends us down the laneway of discussing the trades, potential trades. How deep do they go when they look at replacing Aidan Hutchinson? I mean, when you think about Isaac Iwuka, you're talking about a college free agent acquisition, right?
Yeah.
And not saying that I'm sure more than almost any teams in the league, given Dan Campbell's approach, it is next man up. And I love that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they are thinking that. But again, losing Davenport, even though Davenport didn't have that much production to the point of when his injury was, I get that. There's no comparison there. No offense. But Aidan Hutchinson is a groundbreaking, complete. I mean, that's why you saw all the people there on both sides, both teams, like really down and out over one of the teams or one of the league's best defensive players, potentially even the MVP of the defense, defensive league this year. The way that he was playing, who comes in and replaces him, and what do? Do you spend this next game watching and seeing how far you truly are off? Possibly. I mean, Iwuka's not going to, he's a solid player who's growing and learning. Right now, their defense and what Aaron Glenn has done, right? Where are they? I think they're 10th overall defense-ish. I think they're between 5 and 6 on both pass and run. They are legitimate as a defense, right? And third down defense is obviously top 10. When you look at all this, you start thinking, not only that, we love where we're going with our defense, Lindsay, but we also have an offense that's doing what they're doing, which is quite, I think, unbelievable right now, at least where I was thinking how this team was going to be going as Jared Goff put more and more years behind him. I just love how they're playing. And they have an offensive coordinator that, quite honestly, very soon, I mean, he's top notch. He's going to another team next year. So is there an urgency of back to buying, right? Do they really need to buy to get this where they need to be and capitalize so that they don't fall down and all of a sudden, when they had all their pieces together, this was their time to make a good push deep into the playoffs and potentially knock on the Super Bowl door?
So who do they make calls about in that event?
This is a Max Crosby conversation. Let's call it the way it is first. There are other players out there. I get it. Trey Hendrickson, who I really like. We can talk about him. I don't think any way that Cincinnati moves on from him at all or trades him. I don't see it. The Crosby thing is interesting. Not only because he's went to Eastern Michigan and he's got roots there. If you really dig in, and you being on the left coast, you know all about it, what's going on there. There's a lot of banter about how happy or unhappy. He was walking off the field, pushes a coach. You saw that clip, right?
Yep.
By the way, who was that coach? Was it an assistant to an assistant, or was it a I didn't know if it was a legitimate established coach. Nevertheless, it was a coach, right? It was a coach that he pushed. He's frustrated. And so
was that the vibe, or was it like the way he is kind of like,
yeah. Who knows what the vibe is, but
like,
but when I saw John Gruden's son on the left part of the picture tapping him on the chest, like, come on, man, basically like, calm down. I think it wasn't the vibe, like, let's go kick some ass. Okay. Let's get context. You're exactly right. Maybe he was coming off after a big time play. I don't think that was the case, though, was it? I thought I read around it.
I mean, to your point, like, he was asked about the Davante Adams trade rumors a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and he was like, do you think that I haven't lived through this? Like, his answer was almost comedic. Like, bro, I do this every day. Like, this is what life is like here. Like, that was the tone of his answer, like, I've been there. I've done that. I know to just, ignore it all. This kind of stuff happens here all the time, which is, I think the idea of Max Crosby on Detroit's team of all people, like Max Crosby with Dan Campbell, oh my God, it's so exciting. And then the thought of even just potentially moving forward with Max Crosby and Aidan Hutchinson on the same team. I mean, what? Like, wrap it up, NFC. That would be such a good move for Detroit to make. The only thing that I think here is, because it makes sense for the Raiders to potentially be sellers, although then they'd kind of be selling Antonio Pierce out like in his first year. You're like, never mind. But I will say this, based on, and you mentioned I live on the left coast. I know a lot of Raiders fans. My brother is a hardcore Raiders fan. I use him as like a focus group when it comes to Raiders things. And I texted him this morning and he confirmed what I thought. He said, if they trade Max Crosby, I'm out. And he's been a diehard. He's like, they're going to lose my kids as fans. And I texted someone else, Kenny King, who is a well-known podcaster, Raiders fan, like a higher profile Raiders fan. He got back to me. He said, I would drive my car into the Bay. Like, this is the one guy that they feel like they still have. That's the guy whose jerseys they buy as Raiders fans. And while it might make sense from a roster building standpoint to just tear it all the frickin' way down, right, to the studs and start building back up, like, I just think that this is the guy who tilts the fan base. And I just don't know if they can afford that.
Okay, so we're jumping back over to the Raiders because I want to talk about them. I want to continue to talk about the Lions too, because back to your point very quickly, again, you're not just acquiring now going, okay, well, what are we going to do on the other side when Aidan comes back? Is there going to be a mishmash of personalities, and how will two people carry the torch, so to speak, and carry it for the Detroit Lions if that were ever happen? I don't think there's an issue with that at all.
No,
I think at that point, I think if you get in a situation like that and Brad Holmes is able to pull that one off, I think that is a legitimate. I think he already won Executive of the Year. But it's a legitimate Executive of the Year move, right? It's about capitalizing, and while you're up, you stay up and you fucking continue to stay up.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's bring it back over to the Raiders for a minute, because everything you're saying is true. Tom Telesco, remember, Tom is new there, former GM from the Chargers, comes across, the street, so to speak, and now he's in charge. Okay. So now he's got a situation where, Davante Adams leaves. There are some guys on that team, I'm sure, that probably when you come in as a GM, and I remember this, you want to make moves. Sometimes you can make moves. You want to clear it out with the people that aren't good for the organization, meaning not just not good, but they're just not jiving. They've been outspoken about how the Raiders, certain things within the Raiders organization needs to change. So as a GM, you're like, let me just clean this way and this way. Let's trade some. Let's release some. We did that in Atlanta way back, et cetera, et cetera. It is something that you think about how you're going to like retool a team. Max Crosby is not one you're going to be thinking about retooling a team. You can sit down with CJ LeBoy's agent any day, and I love CJ. CJ is awesome, and he's done great work. He was the one that believed in Max Crosby from the very, very beginning, and I remember it. The reason I bring that up is you can sit down and talk to CJ about something like that, and more than likely they're going to say, we're all in. I don't want to answer for anyone, of course. And yet if the frustration is truly there, I'm talking about for Max Crosby, and Tom Telesco is looking at this going, I can't move this guy because people are going to be driving their cars into the bay, et cetera, whatever you mentioned. He's ultimately has to do what's right. And if there's a lot of undercurrent there that no one else really knows about the levels of it, it could precipitate a legitimate move. It would warrant a big trade and a lot of compensation to get a guy like that, which let's talk about that. If Tom Telesco's talking about this, is that 2 first rounds? Is it 3 first rounds? Is it 2 first round picks and a second, third? I mean, what is the booty package to get Max Crosby over to Detroit?
That's a great question.
It's a big question, right?
It is. I mean, you've got a guy who is still really, really young, who is under contract for a few more years, through 2026. So we've got a couple of years after this where he's locked into the salary that they're paying him right now. Yeah, that's a good question. So we just saw Davante Adams, who is older, wide receiver, maybe nearing his cliff year, go for a 3 that could turn into a 2. What do you think? What do you think? Where do you start that conversation if it's for Max Crosby? Well, and by the way, I think in this case, like the Raiders have more leverage with this particular conversation than they did with Davante, because everyone knew that Davante wanted out, right? So I think it's a different situation. They can drive the price up.
No, major leverage, no question. And he is the bedrock of that organization, no question. So yeah, this is why it's not easy to be a general manager in the National Football League when you're faced with situations like this. Everyone can say, it's easy. Cash them out. Let's get more, or don't ever think about it. We'll quit, and half the fan base will quit. You don't think that's weighing heavily on Mark Davis's mind and Tom Telesco as the guy who's going to have to go in there when Mark Davis asks him, Tom, what do you think? You have to give that answer, and you have to be categorical about that answer. You can't sit there and hem-haw about it. You have to think about everything that it would bring to the table for the Raiders by making a move like that and what they would lose. Again, if behind the scenes it's ugly there and it's heating up there and it's causing a lot of issues, and when you have a player that's consistently, again, it might not be publicly, stating their discontent, I know as a former general manager, there are times when I'll be like, all right, good riddance. We'll get what we can get for you. Go somewhere else. If you don't want to be here, that is a tough thing, Lindsay, to convince a player that at the core does not want to be in an organization any longer to stay. There's not much you can do. So, and not to mention that,
and we're jumping, by the way, to a conclusion here about Max Crosby. We don't know that to be true, but certainly it's plausible, right? Because it's been quite a few years where he's been a good soldier and back to the organization and been put in pretty bad situations.
And it doesn't have to be. You're exactly right. I want to make sure I go on record. I'm not saying that I have any insight to that, but for the fact that it's been a while. And here's a situation that, oh my God, it's my dream team, meaning I went to Eastern Michigan. This is where I'm from. To go back and to be a part of a potential organization that is on its way up to being legitimate for years to come. What a great opportunity that would be. And so does it stir it more and more? So I just think it's worth that conversation, because I think that would be the ideal person if we were talking about replacing. Again, Isaac Awuku is not going to lead the charge there. He's going to be a good soldier and he is next man up. I get it.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. But Max Crosby is a game changer that puts them right back where they were with Aidan Hutchinson. Where do you think he ranks in terms of valuable players not named quarterbacks in the NFL? Because I'd have to think that Max Crosby is pretty far up there toward the top.
Are you asking me about Max Crosby or Aidan
Yeah.
Hutchinson, or both?
Well, honestly, they're both in the same conversation, right? But for this particular conversation, I'm talking about Max Crosby.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he's got to be, besides quarterbacks. You're saying, is that
Yeah.
your
Take the
question?
quarterbacks out.
Yeah. I mean, you could say he's in the top 5.
Yeah.
I mean, it's legit. And look, Lindsay, I know that you're going to answer some of these comments this week. You said you were last week. There's some comments flying around here, so we'll be interested to see what they say.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that you pointed that out because I'm asleep at the switch with the comments again. Okay. So, well, I'm not a Raiders hater at all. Pause, Perez. Not even a little bit. And I understand what you're saying about Max not going anywhere. It's not going to happen. I understand. That's the point I'm making, is that it would be a really big move for the Raiders to make. We're talking about the fact that this is the obvious call that the Lions make. I mean, if there's one guy around the league that's on a team that doesn't appear to be going anywhere, that maybe, I mean, you've already seen one of the best players on the Raiders ask to be traded for obvious reasons. And I'm not saying that Max Crosby is asking for that, but it's worth having the conversation about whether or not it's even in the best organizational, whether it's in the best interest of the organization to potentially move on from him, in the sense that you can get so much for him. Like, all the things that we're saying about his value in the league leads to high comp in a trade. And then maybe the Raiders have multiple firsts and can maneuver the draft and go get a quarterback, which they clearly need and are not going to be competitive until they go get. So they've got to think long term and how to build this roster to be competitive next year and the year down the road. I don't necessarily think that I agree that I think that Max Crosby is a tough sell. It's a tough sell for a ton of reasons to the Raiders.
Yeah,
This
and I
is
would
the one guy that you're like, no, we have to build around him moving forward.
No, it's a great point. I'll call you Coach Perez, because I agree with you. We are not Raiders haters. There are a lot of really good things about that organization as far as building around it. All I'm saying from an executive perspective is, here's Tom Telesco coming in, trying to decide on how he wants to continue to build that team,
how he can,
right? There are opportunities there. It'll be interesting to see how it is. And I think if there ever were to be an opportunity and someone wasn't in the right mindset to stay there, unbelievably so, of course, that you could garner a lot of talent within that organization by moving someone as good and established as he is. And I get it. It would kill you guys. It would kill you guys in Las Vegas if you lost a guy that special.
Understandably. I mean, I get it. I totally get it. And like I said earlier, my nephews are Raiders fans, and I think they might tap out. That's my gut feel of the situation. Is people will be like, I've been through too much, and this is where I draw the line. You can't get rid of that guy. So I understand it. But you mentioned something earlier about Mark Davis. Again, we're just having this conversation because I'm sure that the Lions are calling. And so let's go through how this conversation plays out within an organization. And maybe it's not the Raiders, though this is an extreme example, because obviously Max Crosby is number one on the call sheet. But maybe this is, the next team, the other pass rusher, whose team gets a call. The dynamics of it. You mentioned Mark Davis calling Tom Telesco and saying, like, what do you think? I would think that in that particular case, when it's a franchise player and this is the guy who sells jerseys and the fan base loves, that it might be the other way around. Like, I could see Tom Telesco being the guy who's like, hey, I'm getting calls. I could see how I could build something here. This might actually maybe be the best path forward in terms of roster building, that I can see, like, for me to do my job. And then, can I have permission to even have this conversation? I could see Mark Davis just saying no, because an owner is more likely to make that decision emotionally, right? Like, they're thinking about things outside of football. You're obviously always considering the football ramifications, but they're thinking about putting butts in the seats and selling tickets and selling sponsorships and all of the other things that having a star player brings to the table, right?
No, that's exactly right. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think, back to trying to decide on how to build that team, Lindsay, what else, when you look at that defense, who leads that defense down the stretch, right? Besides him. I mean, I guess I ask you that, and that's worthy of discussion. And, yeah, I mean, your face said it all there. I don't, I don't really know what take,
It's not going well even with him.
No,
So
that's right. It's so I guess we could go round and round about it. I will be really interested to see if Detroit knocks on that door seriously, and if Tom Telesco entertains Brad Holmes's discussion and questions. Where do they go? And so anyway, we can talk about that forever, right?
And this is just an example of
Exactly.
like how these conversations happen, right? You start at the top, you go after like this is the swing for the fences. If we could have anyone in the whole wide world to come in and fix this situation, that's where we're starting. And then you go on to the next, and then you go on to the next, and then you go on to the next. But I think we're both in agreement that they probably make some calls, right? Like this feels like an obvious thing.
This feels like an obvious thing. And I think, I do want to mention Trey Hendrickson as well. We can move over to the Bengals for a minute, just because how complicated is that to move a guy as talented as he is as well, right? Again, Lions have, I believe it's $28 million in cap space. Let's just for perspective, Max Crosby, I believe base salary 24 and a half compared to Trey Hendrickson's, which is probably 14, high 14, maybe 15. That's a little bit of a different deal going on there. However, why am I thinking it would be easier to get Max Crosby out of Las Vegas than it would be to get Trey Hendrickson out of Cincinnati? Thoughts on that?
Because you think that they have a chance to be more competitive and turn things around in Cincinnati, and that they're not going to be thinking about selling?
That's probably it. Yeah, that's good GM, putting your GM hat on. I agree with you. That is it. I mean, that's probably what they're thinking. This goes back, and we don't want to be accused of being Raider haters. I get it. But right now, even though they started off the way they did, Cincinnati, can you imagine Mr. Brown saying, yeah, we're going to move one of our premier guys out of here? I just don't see it. I don't see Duke Tobin, who's the acting general manager there, basically. I don't see him doing that. That doesn't feel like that team.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I mean, you're right. I don't see the Bengals as a team that packs things up and says, you know what, we're just going to be sellers this year. I don't think that that's probably likely while they have Joe Burrow. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right move, because I don't see them making a run. But I guess as long as you have Joe Burrow and you have Jamar Chase and you have T. Higgins, for the time being, then maybe they're thinking like we could turn this around at any minute. And that leads me to a conversation that I want to have with you, which is how do teams decide? Like the trade deadline's coming up in a few weeks. How do teams figure out between now and then whether or not they want to be sellers? How does that process go?
Can you repeat that, please? For some reason, I got a call from someone who had some inside information on the Adams trade, and I was thinking, I wonder if we save this or we bring it up. It doesn't necessarily matter, but I would love for you to ask me again, and then I'll.
Okay. All right. Well, and I'll just sit here with bated breath waiting for that big reveal. No, yeah. How do you decide? What's the process like in your experience of a team deciding prior to the trade deadline whether or not they want to be a team that goes and makes trades? And I know that for a part of your career as a general manager, this wasn't really something that happened all that frequently. This is more of a new thing that teams have started moving pieces around more frequently. But obviously there's a period of time where you only have until the trade deadline to figure out whether or not you want to be a team that can get something in return for some of your pieces. So there are a few teams out there who are not doing particularly well that are going to have to make decisions in the coming, days and weeks, right? How does that go?
So let's start off with our very handy Matt Stopsky, who provides us with some great data. That whole 21 to 23 number is at about 14.3 trades during that time frame, right? So during the time, whereas 16 to 18, 7.3 trades. We're just talking about how things are changing. In those earlier years, when I was there from 2008 all the way through to the mid 14, 15s, it was rare, and I was vehemently opposed to it, if at all possible, only because trading in season, there was a lot to it. And especially if you were talking about trading someone who was legitimate foundation, piece in your organization, and you're trading away, that perception in your building not to mention out in the fan base, man, that's a tough one. It means you're giving in, you're throwing the towel, you're not really tough, you're not really resilient, you're not the warrior we thought you were as a team, as a management, as a general manager, your head goes to many different places. I mean, our owner, Arthur Blank, he hated that idea, as I did, because I thought there's no way I want this fan base thinking, even though we might be building up.
Right.
I mean, at November 8th or 4th or whenever it is, the beginning of November,
We're done.
out.
Yeah.
That's a tough spot to be in.
Right.
So I'm not a big fan of it, although I understand, right? I do understand there are situations. Of course, I'm much more understanding of the buying. Of course, the selling thing is really, really complicated. You can send unbelievably negative messaging to not only to your group in the locker room, not only to like, hey, you got rid of that guy that's BS, was my buddy, I used to hang with him, all that, but also it gets that player that is almost on the verge of maybe next deal coming up. How are these guys going to treat me? This is all business, which everyone understands it's all business. But when it slaps them in the face with a big move of, wow, we still have an opportunity, because you never know in the National Football League, and they're moving people, they're moving a very important piece. I mean, it's the information is not only to the players, it's management, it's in the building, it's water cooler talk. It's complicated.
So, but that said,
Yep.
don't you think that fans and players in a locker room at a certain point of the season can be reasonable about the team that they're on? And I fully understand all of the things that you're saying, 100%.
Sure.
Also, I think that if they are short term, like their contract isn't for long, then they're like, well, this does absolutely nothing for me. But if they're under contract for a long period of time, I think that they could probably figure out ways that this might benefit them in the long term. Like the Panthers, for instance, as a team that is doing much better in the last few weeks, and has some glimmers of hope, on a week to week basis. Like you could argue that it's still worth it maybe to go to the games, or if you're a fan, like, you're not completely avoiding them entirely. It's not a complete and total Cleveland Browns, disaster show, but also you could sell it to them, but you could sell it to the local media, and the local media could sell it to them about like, if we get rid of this guy at a time when no one thinks we're going to the Super Bowl at all this year. Like, this is not our year. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows we need a quarterback. We just whiffed on Bryce potentially. And maybe he gets better while he's not on the field, and we can develop him off the field and maybe work him back in there. But it's probably more likely that this is not his home for a long term. And so now, how do we get a quarterback? Like, what do? We just gave up all these assets. And so if you start trading pieces away, then you could sell a plan there. Like, this is how we're going to fix the problems that we have. We have a plan in place. You kind of have to move some pieces in order to do that, no?
The only way that you can sell a plan to a head coach and a general manager is for your owner to categorically be behind you in the next 2 years to come. Like, you have to make sure that the head coach and the GM know that as the owner, you are behind them. Lindsay, if you start coming in talking to the general manager on one side as an owner and say, we got to move people, and you walk down the hall and tell your head coach, hey, we're going to trade this guy and that guy, it is a clusterfuck.
Yeah.
It is really complicated.
How am I going to prove I can be a head coach in this league? How am I going to have any success? Yeah.
And then what happens is that breeds an unbelievable amount of sort of mistrust between GM, head coach. Are you really behind me? Even though our owner is like hanging on, at so many levels between both the GM and the head coach, it just becomes a really interesting conversation. How do you prove to the head coach, hey, I'm behind you as the general manager, but I'm about ready to trade two of your guys, or one really important guy that you've been banging your head against the wall of how important he is, but he's going to help us. Oh, by the way, head coach, you may not be with us next year, and I might not be with us next year, but we're still going to do it.
Right.
That is a really tough sell.
I do understand that. Interestingly, since we used the Panthers, I used the Panthers as an example, and I don't have the specifics in front of me, so forgive me about that. But I vaguely am recalling when Christian McCaffrey was traded, And I felt that same way. I felt like they have telegraphed, like, we're done. We're tapping out here. We're going to trade our best guy, our best offensive player, like best player, to the Niners. Like, this is bad at this stage of the season. And then they proceeded to actually do pretty well, if memory serves me correctly. So it might just depend on who it is. It might depend on, I don't know. But I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could rattle off some wins after making a move like this and still kind of pull it together. But you're right. Your point's taken that it's a really complicated thing. So we're probably not going to see a bunch of teams just start tapping out. But who are the teams that you think are probably having conversations within their building about whether that's the right move for them? We've already seen one trade by the Jaguars, who are certainly a team that is struggling.
We also know that trade by the Jaguars wasn't a monumental trade, right?
Right. Yeah.
To me, there's a difference. You're moving some guys that are, for a 5th or 6th or something like that. To me, that's very different than the legitimate ones that we were talking about, i.e.
Yeah, it's no Max Crosby for sure.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, you can talk about all of the teams that are at the lower level of where they are right now and start asking, would they be asking this question internally? And again, you're talking to someone that's very, very, I'm pretty heated about this conversation because I've been in that mode where those conversations have been brought up.
Yeah.
And they're just not easy to stomach. So if you start mentioning some of the teams that you think might, I would love to respond to them versus me precipitating, only because, Lindsay, and I start thinking about it, I have a counterpoint when I think about some of the teams that I think you might be thinking about. You can talk about Jacksonville. You can talk about Carolina. You can talk about Dallas. You can talk about the Rams. Possibly. Go ahead. So
you just said you weren't going to name any teams, and then you just rattled off all the teams there. Let's go Panthers real quick. Just this very specific example, one of just 2 teams that are bottom 10 in EPA per play offensively and defensively. So they've got a lot of problems. They've got a lot of holes to fix moving forward. This clearly is not their year. Are they a team that you consider?
No, you're going to be mad at me because everyone I'm going to say no, because I still think it's early and premature. I really do. And I still think this is going to be important to see how they approach their quarterback situation at this juncture too. We won't spend too long on each one of these teams. Yep. I'm still thinking
the answer is no.
Yeah, the answer is no. That's what I'd say. Let's move on then. Because I think they need to continue to work on building this team together. They need to show their coach that they have faith in him as he's going to continue to build. And I think it's important.
So the Jaguars were another team that their name has already come up. I know you've already told me that the answer is going to be no. So I'm going to pivot off of that question and ask you a different question related to the Jaguars. The fact that it's now conversationally, narratively, it started to turn to, is Trevor Lawrence not the guy? Like, maybe we don't actually have that guy. The fact that those are conversations that we're starting to hear out there, does that affect whether or not they retain through the season or move on from Doug Peterson, who is a coach who I think is on the hot seat? That London game this past week went very poorly for his team. During the game, I was thinking like he might not, we talked last week about how the London games are kind of wonky for the owners, how they get a little bit more emotional after losses when they're embarrassed on international soil for one reason or another. There are 3 head coaches now, I think, who have been fired in the last 10 years following a loss in London. And my brain immediately went to like, I don't know if he makes it back. But then they're playing another game in London this week, and it's a winnable game against the Patriots. And so I certainly don't think you fire him and then send him across the ocean prior to that, right, when they're in London. But my question is, my rambling question here is the fact that Trevor Lawrence is now kind of finding his name in the types of conversations that I mentioned. Does that maybe expedite the firing of a head coach so that they're uncovering every possible stone of fixing this problem before they start looking at the quarterback position? Because clearly they're more invested in Trevor Lawrence than they are in a head coach, which sounds weird, but is true, I think.
A couple points just for context as well. So you have the general manager there, Trent Baalke, again, tried and true football man, knows his stuff, knows how to evaluate, strong personality, right? With a head coach.
Yep.
He's been behind him up to this point, of course, and I'm sure he probably still is behind him. I don't know, to a point, right? Where that's a tough decision. Shad Khan has given them I don't know. It was it a light thumbs up, like, hey, I'm behind both
Yeah.
of my men here. I think it's
that historically is not
right.
the vote of confidence is almost like a nail in the coffin, but
I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, my thought on it though is, I mean, Trent Baalke has been there through one head coach, right? Actually, no, he was there prior to being the general manager, the head guy there, right? With Urban Meyer, and then it switched, and his first head coach has been Todd Peterson, correct?
Doug, yeah.
Todd Peterson. I just looked up my Doug Peterson. So Todd Peterson happens to be a guy who teaches me golf down the street. But
hi, Todd.
Yeah, shout out to Todd. Doug Peterson. But my GMs normally get 2 opportunities to get the right head coaches in there, to get the right development there with a quarterback that we know is very, very talented. So I think Trent Baalke's in a spot where, personally, that he should continue to decide on what the next steps are here. And it's not answering your question necessarily right now. What is answering your question is, there is no way people should be cashing out on Trevor Lawrence. Because I will tell you, if you want to acquire a really good head coach in the future, whenever that is, whether it's this year, next year, whatever it is, you better have a bona fide quarterback there. You better be at the lower end of it all and have an opportunity to pick a quarterback. I think there are coaches out there that are sort of looking at this situation in Jacksonville from afar right now. No one wants to admit it. And they're saying, I would love to work with this quarterback. I can win with this quarterback. And that's what happens in this league, right? They don't come out publicly and say it. Some of these coaches are in between jobs right now. I know you're going to go where you think you're going to go because you like going there when you start talking about the out of work coaches that are looking at these places. But it is important. This quarterback is going to be a very important attraction to the next wave of coaching if it does happen in Jacksonville.
What do you see about Trevor Lawrence's play? What have you seen since he's been in the NFL that makes you think that he is an attractive quarterback to work with?
Look, he has the requisite traits. I've talked about these traits before. He has, I mean, obviously he's got size, he's got athleticism, he's got ability to move the ball around the field at any level. He can make throws at any level. I think the only thing, and I can go on and on about that, I think where people are struggling right now is they are questioning his passion, which is unfortunate. Some people are even going all the way back to when he made comments during that draft process. Do you remember that? Where he's like,
no,
my life. He made comments like, I love it. I really do. But if it ended tomorrow, I don't know exactly how he said it.
So he's healthy. People are so weird about stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying Tom Brady isn't healthy? Is that what you're saying?
I think Tom Brady might actually have an interesting conversation about that, right? Like we all kind of over prioritize things in our life that are not ultimately our life, like in terms of defining ourselves by the thing that we do rather than who we are. But those kinds of conversations around draft time are always fascinating to me. This year, take it for what it is worth. Just throwing this out there for this conversation. Trevor Lawrence is 23rd in the NFL in EPA per dropback, which is higher than Dak Prescott, higher than Matthew Stafford, who I think is in a really wonky environment, right? Like why is wonky my word today? I've said that way too many times. But the other names here at the bottom are not particularly good NFL quarterbacks, or they're Bo Nix, who's a rookie. So I don't know. I feel like I'd like to see it click for Trevor Lawrence in a way where it's like an emphatic, this is the guy. But also I'm the queen of environment matters for quarterbacks, right? Like this is the whole Sam Darnold argument. And can you make a case for like Trevor Lawrence has had every opportunity and he just has never pulled it out? Like, no, I'm certainly not going to make that argument for sure.
Do you think Trevor Lawrence how do you think he stacks up against Justin Herbert?
No, I don't. I would take Justin Herbert. I wouldn't think twice about it. I might be wrong, but that's
where is Justin? Where is Justin in all of this? because it's going to
So,
be.
which data are you interested
Well,
in
I'm interested
finding?
in anything that is that SumerSports
Excuse
is.
it?
No, 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 not at all. I'm looking forward to seeing, what we're talking about. We have some really cool data and advanced analytics regarding quarterback and quarterback play. You probably don't have it, and Stopsky probably can't pull it up off, on a whim like this. But
Why
the reality,
Stopsky taking strays here?
no, stop. Well, I gave Stopsky a good thumbs up there earlier.
That's true.
He was wearing his high school shirt, by the way. Uh, Stopsky does a little bit of coaching on the side, his beloved Long Island high school team. But while you're looking for that, I guess that was my question, because there are quarterbacks out there. I just don't want to diss on Trevor Lawrence. I think he has a lot of ability. Why has he not risen to the occasion as has been expected? That's something that would be interesting. And I would be interested to know if you do have this next wave of head coaches, if it does in fact come to fruition for Doug, not Todd Peterson. And I'm not saying that lightly, of course, is that, what is that? How are people evaluating? It is not easy to have a quarterback. And how old is Trevor Lawrence, by the way? Is he 27?
I don't have that in front of
Yeah.
me, actually.
I
Trevor
mean,
Lawrence, I mean, it
talking
wasn't
about
that long
young
ago
quarterbacks.
that he
Exactly.
was the number 1 overall pick. I mean, that
You're
we're
talking
talking
about
about Urban.
You're
He's
right. And
25.
you're talking about young quarterbacks. There is so much out there and so much in front of him, I believe. That's
He's
what I
25
believe.
and he just turned 25. So, yeah.
So, I know, anyway, Trevor Lawrence, SumerSports Football AI ranking 14th. There you go. All right. And what
Okay,
about
that's not bad.
the guy out in at the Chargers? Where is Herbert?
Oh,
Come on, Stopsky. Can you
oh,
pull it up?
this one better. This
While
one
we're
better.
waiting, Lindsay. So, I mean,
Yeah.
but you think about some of these quarterbacks like this, right? I
Mhm.
mean, those guys weren't busts and haven't been busts. They're just trying to feel their way through it all, right? Tom
Mhm.
Brady mentions, like, we haven't really given these guys the time that they really deserve. It's a different NFL today, right? While we're talking about this, do you believe that when Tom made his strong comments about we're not doing them a favor by not training them the way that we used to train them?
Yeah.
In today's world, it's fast paced. You got to get in, you got to get out, you got to operate now.
Well, I think that there's evidence of that everywhere. This year, this is the poster year for that comment, right? I mean, you've got Sam Darnold finding success after everyone argued for years that he was a bust and it wasn't his, like we already know how bad he is. Like, for years people emphatically said that because he had not been successful in bad environments. And then you've got him. You've got guys coming off their couches, almost literally in the case of Joe Flacco, out there having degrees of success. I think we have evidence everywhere in the NFL this year in particular about how important experience is at the quarterback position. And no, there's not a chance for people to gain that experience without being on the field, unless you have a team like the Packers, who is Stopsky. Stop it. He gave us our answer, and I don't like it.
No, you don't like it. And Stopsky, I was going to say, were you pulling on a vape there? It took you a while to get that deal up there on the screen, but thank you for bringing it up.
Justin Herbert
We
is
don't have
30.
to say. Oh, I was going to say you didn't have to say.
I'm gonna play this out. I said what I said. I stand by what I said, despite what the computers think. AI, he's 31st. Justin Herbert's 31st.
But I want to make sure we know this and everyone knows this. I was not alluding to the fact that Stopsky was high. I was just saying he was relaxing with his feet kicked up, pulling on a vape. I don't even know if you vape, but some reason I thought you did. I don't know why.
What is happening right now? We're getting into things. I don't know. The Dolphins, another team that I don't even remember if you mentioned them, is a team that we might. Well, Tyreek kind of put them in this trade conversation with some of his Twitter posts and comments. And is he joking? And is he just stirring the pot? I don't even know. But the Dolphins have scored 60 points all season, Thomas. This team is it's fascinating because obviously they're without Tua, and clearly Tua is a big piece to this puzzle. And I mean, I've got questions about the build here and why they don't have a backup quarterback that they can tap into. That is, I mean, we've got all of these trying to think of names of people that they could have there. What, who could be their Andy Dalton? There could be their Joe Flacco. I mean, Ryan Tannehill. Round 2 in Miami maybe could fix these problems.
Did you mention Trey Lance? Like, was he one that has been brought up
No.
out there? No, you don't think he comes in and does anything? You just have not committed.
Well, Trey Lance has a $5 million contract to be the QB3 in Dallas, which I will never ever forget that number for the rest of time now, because on the heels of Jerry Jones's comment about not being able to afford Derrick Henry's $9 million salary. Anywho, but I don't know. I don't know if Trey Lance is any good. Like, we have no evidence that he is. So I would almost think that if you were the Dolphins and you called on somebody like Ryan Tannehill, I mean, for crying out loud, their whole offense, even with Tua, is like throw the ball 4 to 5 yards downfield and let these guys pick up yards after the catch. So I don't understand exactly why they're struggling to get this done, but they are struggling to get this done. 60 points all season. Worth mentioning, well, that's obviously dead last in scoring. They've only played 5 games, so they have one less game than everybody else. But I mean, Thomas, the Vikings have outscored their opponents by more points than that. They're plus 63 in terms of margin of victory. So it's been brutal for the Dolphins, and they're going to have some conversations about how they turn that around and what this means for Mike McDaniels moving forward if he can't find a way to score more than 60 points after losing Tua. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But let me get to the NFC North then off of that Vikings comment, because I found some interesting information this week. I went to look at if you listen to like the data scientists, they consistently say, and we're all looking for stats that will tell the story of who's good, who's not good, individually, team, all of these things. What I've heard over and over and over again from people is that margin of victory, net scoring, is a sticky stat. That's a predictor of which teams are actually good. So that's when I always kind of go and I check and see, who's leading in this department, whether they're winning or not, like just to have it on my radar. And I went and looked at that, obviously, for the Lions this week after they blew out the Cowboys. And you will not be surprised at all to know that they moved very high up the net scoring rankings after that big win. They went from 8th in the NFC to number 2. They're now plus 60 after that game. So number 1 is the Vikings at plus 63. Number 2 is the Lions at plus 60. And then I thought, who's number 3? Let's go look at number 3 and find out who that team might be. Would you care to take a guess? I'm building out a theme here.
Vikings?
No, they're number 1.
They're 1. Oh, you said, yeah. Okay. Green Bay.
No, that's close. They're number 4. Number 3 is the Bears. The Bears are number 3 in the NFL in net scoring, plus 47. And the Packers are number 4. So the entire NFC North is 1, 2, 3, 4 in net scoring, which I think is crazy and fascinating and could start a whole bunch of conversations about whether or not the NFC representative is coming out of the NFC North. Now you've got 4 teams at the top, lots to choose from. Do we possibly get all 4 of those teams in the playoffs this year? Or, is there some attrition that happens because they're playing each other? I will say this, Thomas, in terms of the stickiness of the net scoring stat, I went through and looked at Super Bowl representatives. For whatever reason in the AFC, this is not true. But in the NFC, in 6 of the last 7 years, the NFC's leader in net scoring at this point of the season, after 6 weeks, was the NFC representative in the Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
In 6 of the last 7 years.
That's a great stat. You're talking about stickiness. You're talking about, NFC North. I mean, everything you're talking about is like, it's so exciting to watch how this is moving around. And I love watching it from an executive standpoint, how these guys are building their teams, how they come in kind of under evaluated, and all of a sudden they're building some really solid teams across the board. Great. And by the way, speaking of stickiness, Amari Cooper, do you want to talk about that?
Breaking news. Dateline. Cleveland. What? That's huge. The Browns traded Amari Cooper to the Buffalo Bills. Oh, first of all, love that for Buffalo.
Yeah, love it for Buffalo. Love it for Jordan Schultz to be dropping that, by the way. I'm a big fan of Jordan Schultz. Go ahead.
Love it for Amari. Love it for Amari. I mean, we're talking about teams being sellers. I'm actually almost legitimately shocked that Cleveland is making this move simply because they won't move on from Deshaun Watson for whatever reason. And so how, if you're not going to move on from Deshaun Watson, do you start moving on from other pieces? Like, I don't necessarily understand the thought process of both things being true at the same time. But
and the Bills, let's talk about the Bills for a minute. I mean, you're excited about that. You think he can come in there and do what he needs to do. Where does he slot in your mind? Like, how are they playing him there? Do you have any idea about that, or you want to ask me that instead? I mean, what are your?
Why don't you go first? What do you mean? Where they're playing him?
Like how do they utilize him? How many? I mean, right now at Cleveland, what does he have? Stops going to keep throwing out these stat asks for you. We should have them in place before we talk about it. We weren't expecting.
We can't have stats for everything.
I understand.
You know, we're pivoting to Amari on the fly. This is fun. Let's go look it up. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look up some Amari stuff for you here.
Yeah, like receptions, Amari Cooper.
Is that how you Google? Receptions.
Yeah. No, I use something else besides Google, but that's okay. By the way, I mean, I like Perplexity, by the way. Just go. Okay.
But in terms of Buffalo's roster makeup,
yep.
I think in the last few weeks, it's become clear that maybe they could use an upgrade at the wide receiver position. And they've also had some people kind of going in and out of the lineup in terms of injuries. So they might just need some depth in that regard also. Mm-hmm. But, it's not looking the way that I think that they had hoped that it would look. It's interesting that Amari Cooper is the guy that they went and got, though.
53 targets, 24 receptions. Yeah, 24 receptions, 250 yards.
Well, okay. I mean, how many of those have even been catchable? Right? Like, I mean, we're looking at historically bad quarterback play taking place this year. And I am not overstating that in Cleveland. It's a disaster in a bunch of different ways. And we don't need to get into that again. We've had this conversation already. And I feel like people are just tired of hearing the conversation. But Amari Cooper, I mean, we've seen what he can do in the past. And you put him with Josh Allen?
Well, I think back, yes. I know we have that on tap here. Let's just jump back quickly to the Browns, though. I'm sitting there saying it sends a really, really interesting message to the locker room, to management, to coaching. And all of a sudden, you're moving exactly what you said. You're moving a receiver away from an offense that has been struggling as it has been. What recourse do they have? I don't even know how to even dig into that one. I mean, for the decisions from that organization to make this decision, I don't know. I'm trying to get my head around that. What you feel about that and how you feel that. What does that state for the Cleveland Browns and their fan base? We're gonna start building for later.
I don't even understand how to start thinking about that because the first and most obvious move is to put Deshaun Watson on the bench, and they are so committed to not doing that for some reason. And I can't figure out why. And so if I can't figure out the first step, then it's hard to understand how they're thinking logically about any kind of trickle down, because now it feels like logic isn't applying here. So, and in fact, you've talked about Stopsky a lot today. Stopsky, the star of our show. I had a conversation with him about this yesterday. We were talking about who might be sellers, and we were kicking the idea around of the Browns around, and it doesn't make sense that they would be sellers if you won't even move on from Watson. Like, why would they sell? And then that pivoted to, might they potentially be buyers? Like, if we are continuing to throw Deshaun Watson out there on the field because we owe him, all of this money for the next handful of years, then if you are committing to that bit, then you might as well commit to going all in and putting pieces around him too, right? Like, if you're not willing to cut bait with this and start building for the future in a different way, then why not put him in a position to succeed and clearly they're not going in that direction, which I fully understand.
Well, when you
But
look at the yards here, the top receivers, as you're seeing on the bottom of the screen here, Jerry Jeudy at 248 yards and the rest down in below 100. This is unbelievable. Which brings me back to what we're talking about. The Haslams being very supportive of Andrew Berry. I think he just signed a new contract, right? It makes it easier. I hate even that word, but it's a lot more consumable or easier to digest, so to speak.
If your job's safe.
Yes, when your job is safe. At least one of their jobs is safe. Did Stefanski get an extension on his contract? Because
I don't know that answer.
I know that Andrew did. The general manager, of course. So it does make it easier to do that, right? Just back to our point earlier, where some others might be a different situation, of course. I know we're at 105. We could talk forever. We didn't even get to all of our discussion points.
Stefanski did get an extension at the same time. So both of them are safe, which does make sense. And I do vaguely remember us talking about that actually a couple of weeks ago. So I should have known that. Because that feels like an acknowledgement of, I know you guys didn't do this, right? Like, you're not going to pay the price for the fact that this isn't working because I made us do this Deshaun Watson thing. That's one's actually saying that. Don't you think that's the read between the lines? Otherwise, why?
Like, that is a big time comment coming out with another 2 minutes left on this show. I love it. It's hot. It's a hot topic.
But I think it's obvious.
You think he goes into the bowels of that organization, into the building, and he says, "Hey,
is that where they work?
Hey guys, let's yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
I love it. I don't think it even is.
And you're saying strongly that he's going, hey, mea culpa. It's my mistake. You guys make the moves you want to make. Whatever happens, we signed you to a new contract, and
isn't that obvious? If they go, so these guys, if it wasn't Jimmy Haslam who was like, go make this deal now, give him whatever, all of the guaranteed money, I don't even care. This is my call, which we all agree it had to have been his call. No general manager in the league has the authority, not named Jerry Jones, to go ahead and give a fully guaranteed contract to a quarterback without that being in part the owner's idea and or signing off on that deal. So clearly Jimmy Haslam had to have his fingerprints on the Deshaun Watson deal. I mean, for a million reasons. He was under investigation. Like, you have to be like, yeah, I'm okay with taking on this litigation.
What I'm saying, however, yes, he is. That's his job. But he also has his loyalists, his two dudes that are in charge, ultimately saying, okay, this is what I am ready to do. I'm ready to invest. And gentlemen, tell me, I want an answer right now. Yes or no. Do we do this? Yes, let's go. Let's go. Pin our ears back and let go. It's an all-in situation. It has to be.
I mean, I guess. Are you sitting in the room? Are you sitting in the room with the owner who wants to make this move? Who's like, we've never had a quarterback. All of our quarterbacks suck. Like, swing for the fences. Let's go get this guy. He's great in Houston. He was great in Houston. Why is he so bad in Cleveland? That's a separate conversation. But what they'd seen from him, I mean, the year and a half prior to them signing him, when they last saw him on the NFL field, was that he was a good quarterback. Like, I understand why they did it. It's gross, but I understand why they did it from a football standpoint. And I understand why an owner would be willing to walk down that road. I don't necessarily even think that everybody needs to be on the same page. If the owner decides that that's who he wants, you just go, okie doke.
You don't just go okie doke.
You don't?
No,
you wouldn't okie doke Arthur Blank in that situation.
You don't go okie doke. You have some legitimate conversations about it. You all present your thoughts and your processes, et cetera. And in the end, you categorically, there's me.
What the owner wants.
You use wonky. I use categorically today. But in the end, yes, you do. You have to. I get it. What the owner wants. But you're going to have to convince them otherwise. If you say, no, we'll go through it. I don't imagine that Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski left and went to a local watering hole in Berea, Ohio, and started bashing the decision of the Cleveland Browns to bring in Deshaun Watson because they weren't behind it. I believe that, look, and they have a right to be behind it, because that player coming out, whatever you want to discuss or argue about him, there are a lot of things, right? I'm talking about pure ability.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very, very talented football player, and he could do a lot of special things. Obviously, we know that things have changed and adjusted, and we've had conversations about that. So I'm just saying it's not like you're telling. It's not like the owner is saying, you know, I want to bring in, you know, I don't even know who it would be. I don't even want to throw a name out there,
right?
Because I was gonna mention Joe Flacco in the later years, but he's obviously doing well. But
that might have worked out better.
Yep. Oh, there we go. Another hot take. Yeah, maybe.
Look, here, all I'm saying about the fact that they got the thanks, Stavsky. All I'm saying about the fact that they got these extensions is they got the extensions after it had already become apparent that one of the biggest trades in NFL history was not a successful one. And so you extend the people who were involved in that move. Doesn't that feel like an admission of like, I want to secure your, I want to make you feel comfortable here making moves. If they were the ones, if he blamed them in any way for having made that move, which we now know is a disastrous one, he wouldn't have extended them. He just wouldn't have done it.
But I come back to maybe the more idealistic element, and that is an owner and his two generals come to the table and making a group decision in the end. And it's, yes, we all agree, hand in the middle, let's go fight, whatever the line is, win, etc.
You don't know what comes after go fight?
No, I don't know. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I think, and you know, personally, I believe that the Haslams are of sound mind this way. Whatever their decisions have been, they've made some big quarterback decisions, right, as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? You want to go back and start talking about some of the quarterbacks? We showed it. Didn't we show the list?
I mean, it's
not
so
just
long.
not just during their time there, but
yeah,
it's a long time.
Brown's history.
Yeah.
But they took the swing with Manziel at the top of the draft. Like they've made a ton of moves.
Is there another guy? Baker? What's his name? Mayfield? I mean, you said Manziel, right?
Yeah.
What other quarterbacks?
Yeah. No, I mean, there have been a bunch. Those are the most recent ones in the draft.
I'm being
facetious. But okay, but Amari's gone. So
yes. Amari's gone. So what are they doing now? He's won, I think it was 252 yards total. So he had one of the highest totals. Now what are they doing? Who moves up into that slot?
Does Nick Chubb come back?
I don't know that.
If they're already like, because this is the week that people kind of had on their radar, he's returned to practice. He's been out on the field. You've got this guy who's a really good running back, but he's getting up there. Like, do you put him back on the field after that injury? Also, do you put him back sooner rather than later? Do you just like hit pause? Like, why? Why put him out there? Why risk it for the future? I don't know.
So, this is a precarious situation going into a really interesting part of the season, as we just talked. So time will tell. We could go back and forth on this forever. I love your hot takes. I love your passion about it. I love your putting the Haslams on notice, which, you know, is a great thing.
Hopefully they don't wield the power that Jerry Jones does with radio hosts.
I only love that because you're standing by what you say to me on the off times when you're like, no, we need you to be very outspoken, Thomas. You can't be the former general manager. So anyway.
All right. Well, man, look at this. We started off talking about a trade that should be made, and instead a very different trade was made while we were live on the air. So that's fun. That's going to do it for today's edition of the SumerSports Show. If you're not already a subscriber, please go subscribe in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts. We have an episode up every week, and that way that episode will be waiting for you whenever it's available. And in the meantime, hope you enjoy week 7. Let's see if these trades keep coming, man.
Let's do it. Watch closely. Thank you.
Have a good one. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks.